Chapter 9. Abbot Mortimer and Constance the Badger meandered through the grounds together. Both creatures were deep in thought. Had they spoken and voiced their thoughts, they would have mentioned the same subject, the safety of Redwall. Down long ages of beautiful old abbey had stood for happiness, peace, and refuge to all. Diligent mice tended the neat little vegetable patches, which every season came forth an abundance of fresh produce: cabbages, sprouts, marrows, turnips, peas, carrots, tomatoes, lettuces, and onions, all in their turn. Flower beds, heatedly and fragrant with countless varieties of summer blooms, from rose to humble daisies, were planted by the mice and husbanded by the hard-working bee folk, who in their turn rewarded Redwall with plentiful supplies of honey and beeswax. The two friends wandered onwards past the pond. Early morning sunlight glittered off the water, throwing out ripples from the fish caught by overnight lines, which had been baited and left to drift each evening by Brother Alf. Ahead of them lay the berry hedge, raspberry, blackberry, bilberry, and the strawberry patch, where every August sleepy baby creatures could be seen, their stomachs full after eating the pick of the crop. Gradually they made their way around the big old chestnut trees into the orchard. This was the abbot's favorite spot. Many a leisurely nap he had taken on sunny afternoons, with the aroma of ripening fruit hovering in his whiskers: apples, pears, quince, plums, damsons, even a vine of wild grape on the warm red stone of the south-facing wall. Old Mother Nature's blessing lay upon the haven of warm friendliness. Now, with the threat of Clooney upon Redwall, the two old friends assessed the beauteous bounty of their lifelong abode. Sweet bird song on the still air tinged Constance's heart with sorrow and regret that this peaceful existence would soon pass. Gruffly she snuffled deep in her throat, blinking off a threatening teardrop. The abbot sensed his companion's distress. He patted the badger's rough coat with a gentle paw. There, old girl, don't fret. Many times is our history has tragedy forestalled by miraculous happenings. Constance grunted in agreement, not wishing to disillusion her trusting old friend. Deep within her she knew a dark shadow was casting itself over the abbey. Furthermore, it was happening in the present, not in bygone days of fabled deeds. Matthias seated himself to an early breakfast in cabin hole: nut breads, apples, and a bowl of fresh goat's milk. Cornflower, along with the other woodland creatures granted sanctuary, was sleeping in makeshift quarters provided by the good mice of Redwall. Matthias felt that he had grown up overnight. Duty was a mantle that he had taken willingly upon his shoulders. It was where a threat of Redwall came outside, it must be dealt with it. The mice of Redwall were peaceful creatures, but that must not be taken as a sign of weakness. Stolidly he munched on away as he confronted the problem. Eat heartily, Matthias. No point in facing troubles on an empty stomach. Feed the body, nourish the mind. The young mouse was surprised to see old Brother Methuselah had been watching him. His eyes twinkled behind the curious spectacles he invariably wore. The ancient mouse sat down on the breakfast table with a small groan. Don't look so surprised, young one. Your face is an open book to one of my ears. Matthias drained the last of the milk from his bowl, wiping cream from his whiskers from the back of a paw. Give me your advice, Brother Methuselah, he said. What would you do? The old mouse wrinkled his nose. Exactly the same thing as you would. That is, if I were younger and not so old and stiff. Matthias felt he had found an ally. You mean you would fight? Methuselah rapped the table with a bony paw. Of course I would. That's the only sensible course to take. He paused and stared at Matthias in an odd manner. You know, there's something about you, young feller. Did you ever hear the story about how Martin the warrior first came to Redwall? Matthias leaned forward eagerly. Martin, tell me, brother. I love hearing about the warrior monk. Methuselah's voice dropped to a secretive whisper. It was written in the great chronicle of Redwall that Martin was very young to be such a warrior. He would have been the same age as yourself, Matthias, like you. He was impulsive and had a great quality of youthful innocence about him when he first came to our abbey. But it was also written that in times of trouble Martin had the gift of a natural leader, a command over others far superior to him in age and experience. The chronicle says that they looked to Martin as the same looked to a strong father. Matthias was full of wonderment, but he could not help feeling puzzled. "Why do you tell me all this to me, brother Methuselah?" The old mouse stood up, staring hard at Matthias for a moment, then turning, he shuffled slowly off. As he went, he called back over his shoulder, "Because, Matthias? Because he was very like you." Before the young mouse could question the old one further, did Joseph Bell told out warning. Sandals flapping, Matthias dashed out into the grounds, nearly colliding with the abbot and Constance, who, like everyone else, were heading for the gatehouse. Brother Rufus and George had an incident to report. A large, evil-looking rat covered in tattoos and carrying a rusty cutlass had turned up at the gate. He had tried to gain entry by pretending he was injured. Limping about, the rat explained that he had been in a hay cart that overturned into the ditch. Would they come with him and render assistance to his friends, many of whom were lying trapped beneath the cart crying out for help? Brother Rufus was no fool. How many rats were traveling in the cart altogether? "Oh, a couple of hundred," came the glib reply. "Then why," reasoned Brother Rufus, "did the rat not give aid to his own companions? Surely all 200 were not trapped." The rat evaded the questions and made a great show of rubbing his injured leg. Could they not take him in and dress his wound and perhaps give him a bite to eat at least? Brother George agreed on the condition that the rat surrender his weapon. The rat made as if to do so, then suddenly lunged at Brother George, only to be sent sprawling by a blow from Brother Rufus's staff. Realizing that he was up against two big, competent mice who stand no nonsense, he became abusive and bad-mouthed. "Ha! Just you wait, Mouse," he raged. "There's a whole army of us camped down in the church. When I tell Clooney how you treated me, ho ho, just wait. That's all. We'll be back, by the fang we will." With that he slunk off, cursing all mice. The grim news was digested in silence by the assembled creatures. Mrs. Church Mouse began sobbing. "Oh, dear me, did you hear that, my dear? There must be living in our old home at St. Ninian's Church. Oh, whatever shall we do? Our dear old home, full of dreadful rats." Mr. John Churchmouse tried to comfort his wife as best he could. There, hush now, missus. Better not lose a house than lose our lives. A good job we got sanctuary here at Redwall. But what about the other creatures in the area?" cried Matthias. "Sensible mouse," said Constance. "Is Ambrose Spice anywhere about?" "He better do round and tell them to take sanctuary here at Abbey as quickly as possible. Spike will come to no harm. Once he curls up, there's nothing that can touch him." This idea was greeted with enthusiasm. Brother Alf went off to find the hedgehog. The abbot suggested they all go inside the abbey and await further developments. Matthias piped up again. "We'd best mount a guard on the walls." One of the older mice, Sister Clemens, chided Matthias as an upstart. Her voice was stern and condescending. "Novice Matthias, you will be silent and do as your abbot commands." Much to everyone's surprise, the abbot came to Matthias's defense. "One moment, Clemens. Matthias speaks sense. Let us hear what he has to say. We are none of us too old to learn." All eyes were turned to the young mouse as Matthias heard himself boldly outline his plans for the defense of Redwall. It was 11 o'clock on the glorious June morning. Moss-flower woods and the woodlands stirred to the brazen voice of the great Joseph Bell. John Churchmouse heaved on the bell rope, as he had been told to do by Matthias and Constance. Bong, boom, bong, boom. Even the small creatures in the wood and field could understand no language save their own knew what it meant. Time of danger, place of sanctuary, carrying what simple belongings they needed. Woodlanders and their families hurried from far and near to gain safety of Redwall Abbey before the storm of Clooney broke upon them. Squirrels, mice, voles, moles, otters, all save the birds of the air, who were safe anyway. Up the dusty road they came, mothers protecting hurting young ones, while fathers provided the rear guard. Brother Methuselah stood at the gate with the abbot. He translated fully to each group of creatures the abbot's message, in turn construing constituting back to the abbot father their grateful thanks with pledges of help and loyalty to Redwall Abbey. For what creatures had not been freely given the aid and special knowledge of the kind mice, all knew they owed their very existence to the abbot and his community. Healing, aid, food, shelter, and good advice were granted to all. Now was the time to unite and repay, to give any help that was possible. Before much longer, Redwall would require the skills and knowledge of all its woodland allies. They would be gratefully given. Matthias and Constance stood up on the top of the high perimeter watching the road. It was noon and the sun shone directly overhead, despite the heat. Matthias had ordered all the mice put on their hoods, to serve as a double purpose, to shield their eyes from the sun and create camouflage effect. Silently each one stood, armed with a stout staff. The high red stone walls were far too lofty to be scaled by any normal creature. Instinctively, Matthias knew this was a good defense and a formidable deterrent. Constance could feel her hackles beginning to prickle. She sniffed the air and shivered despite the heat that simmered in waves across the meadowlands. The big badger nudged Matthias. Listen to that. Matthias pricked up his ears and looked at her questioningly. Even the birds have stopped singing, Constance said quietly. The young mouse gripped his staff tighter. Yes, it's silence we can hear. The grasshoppers have gone quiet. Constance peered down the road as she spoke. Strange for a summer day, little friend. Bong! Every creature sat on the ramparts twitched with fright as the loud voice of Joseph Bell rang out. And John Church Mouse shouted from his high position in the belfry. They're coming! Down the road! I can see them! I can see them!